Welcome to the Single Era Diaries, exploring the journey of a woman who hasn't experienced what it's like to be single in her entire adult life, and pretty much most of her teenage life too. Each episode will navigate the journey of finding a sense of identity, exploring the challenges of co-parenting, finding love of self and healing, all whilst tackling the complexities of the checkered landscape of dating and dating apps, meeting new people, and operating solo in a world that celebrates couples, marriage, and codependency. I am your host, founder of Nascent Media and newly single woman, Jade, and this is the diary of my single era. Welcome back to the Single Era Diaries. This is an episode where I really wanted to dive into a topic that I have a feeling that this is going to very much be on the hearts and minds of newly single people who also happen to be parents. And that's the journey of going from being part of a committed couple, maybe married, maybe not, maybe a long-term relationship, but going from that to becoming co-parents. Those of you who have followed my journey, both on the pod and on socials, will know that back in March this year, I had shared the news that my ex and I were pulling a Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin. We were going to shift from being in a super long relationship of almost 16 years to consciously uncouple and to become co-parents to our daughter. And that was what was very much in the original script and plan. And again, those who have been following the journey so far will know of the slight plot twist where I learned that my ex had been sleeping with another woman prior to us fully separating. The less said about that plot twist, the better. But that aside, what I wanted to get into is really just how challenging it can be to adapt to that change in family life, and how the uncoupling process, how the individuation process can, I'm sure for others and absolutely for me, feel all the more challenging by the fact that when you have and share children with someone, it's not possible in the most part to go no contact and to block that person out of your life, to give you the time to heal from the end of that relationship. And what I've found in my single era journey so far is that so much of the dating and relationship rhetoric that is out there online is really serving this harsh messaging around how to respond and how to behave when a relationship ends. A lot of what I have seen really speaks to this notion of never speaking to the person that you're splitting from again. And believe me, in this current situation I find myself in, whilst there have been so many occasions over the course of this summer and this year where the post-separation process has been really difficult, particularly when I found out about the plot twist. And in those moments, I've really wished that I could have just blocked my ex's number, not spoken to him again, deleted him off every social, everything that has ever existed, caught a flight out to India and just hid out in an ashram. But the truth for me is that was simply not possible. And I'm sure that that's the truth for so very many of you that are listening to this too, that when you have children, unless that split is due to something awful and difficult like domestic violence or substance abuse or criminal activities, something that has a much more seismic impact to that split occurring, then in the most part, you're going to have to find a way of maintaining that dynamic of contact and communication in some new capacity with your ex, even after you've separated. Now, when my ex and I, at the back end of last year, back end of 2022, when we were really acknowledging the issues in our relationship, and that led through to us exploring at the beginning of this year where the relationship was heading or not, there was a really huge acceptance of the fact that he and I had been going in separate directions pretty much the whole time that we've been together, but critically, over the past few years of being parents, we were not on the same page with a whole host of really important things in life decisions, like where our life was going, the direction of travel, what we were going to be doing with our futures, where we saw ourselves in the next chapters of our life. And yet, I think at the same time, as I'm sure so many people that are listening to this that have found themselves at the end of a relationship where you have children together, you're just so incredibly focused and committed and driven to making that family dynamic work. So by the time the decision had been reached that co-parenting and separating was what we were going to do, we really had an idea in our minds of what we would like that to look like. And the real test and the challenge for me especially was finding out about the plot twist and finding a way to be conscious in not allowing that detail and that information to derail the plans that we had made to remain as friends. Because let me tell you, the break of trust coupled with the end of a relationship is quite the test of your spirit. But here's the thing, and I'm sure that pretty much every parent out there will know this only too well. When you're a parent, it's not just about you. And no matter how difficult the situation is that you're going through, when you're a parent, it isn't just about you. There is a small human or humans involved in the breakdown of this relationship. And those small humans, those children, have no agency over or about that situation. Critically, the change that's happening to their family as they know it is not of their choosing. And so it's your job and responsibility as the parent to make the transition to a new version of family be as smooth and as pain-free as possible. So the challenge to co-parenting, and there are many challenges because, again, being human can be hard, and separating from somebody that you thought you were going to be sharing your life with is really hard. So the challenge is managing your own emotions and how you might feel about your ex, which could be thoroughly exasperated. It could be hurt. It could be let down. It could be disappointed. And there's the whole sense of grief that you experience as well. I mean, even if the split is something that you have wanted or you have chosen or that you have agreed is the best course of action as a next step, there will still likely be a sense of grief about that ending, because it's natural that as humans we become used to whatever it is that we have, and change and endings are something that we're not always so great at. You only have to look at some high profile separations that have been going on. And I am, for the first time in my adult life, getting into the Kardashians. And so when you look at Kim Kardashian's journey to co-parenting post-split with Kanye West and the subsequent divorce, even she's admitted that co-parenting is really fucking hard. And their split, much like anyone else in a high profile relationship, is being played out so publicly. But I believe that to some extent, all of us, no matter how big or small our lives are, we're all playing out our lives publicly. No matter how small that goldfish bowl, that sort of microcosm that you exist in is, we're all playing that out, and any of us exist in a vacuum. So there are going to be people around us in our circles, in our social life, in our family life, in our work life, in the lives of our children as well, where people are going to have an insight to what's going on. And I really, throughout this process of becoming single and getting used to that, I've really echoed Kim Kardashian's sentiment of wanting to protect my daughter from the full extent of what has been happening in this separation. Because obviously, her knowing the details surrounding my ex's being with another woman and lying about it, and that whole plot twist chapter, is not something for any child to know about or to carry. And as Kim herself said in an interview, if in relation to her own children, if they don't know things that are being said, why would I ever bring that energy to them? That's really heavy grown-up shit that they are not ready to deal with. And I absolutely 100% agree with that. I have thought on very many occasions throughout this year where I've been really grappling with a lot of inner child stuff and a lot of shadow work. I recall my own experience as a child with parents who separated. My parents separated twice back in the mid to late 90s, and they got back together when I was about 11 or 12, and they've been together ever since. But there was a lot of really heavy adult shit placed on me throughout that period, and I honestly, despite a lot of therapy and a lot of work around this, I don't think I'll ever get over what I experienced in that time and what I was exposed to. I was enormously parentified, and I had to grow up really quickly in order to somehow process and contend with some of the really awful scenarios that were occurring in my home throughout that time and following. Issues with domestic violence, emotional and physical abuse, just a really challenging and volatile and toxic environment to be a part of. And those things, coupled with the parentification that I endured, I have found that they stay with you forever, no matter how much time you've taken to sort of process them in an adult capacity. And so as a result of that, and also just really wanting the best for our daughter, and I'm sure that those who are listening, you want the best for your children in what can be a really difficult situation, we, and you might be doing the same, we really sought out examples of role models of how we could separate as well as possible. And so that we could co-parent as well as possible, along with becoming a new family dynamic. And for me, the Gwyneth Paltrow, Chris Martin thing was really the model. I was like, oh my gosh, like that is, you know, they're really great friends and they talk about each other and they post about each other, and they seem to have this very strong, cohesive, collaborative parenting model that operates across those two homes. Another example that I always kind of look up to, and this is of course without knowing these people, you know, we only get to see so much of that sort of facade that we get to see from the outside world with anybody's lives. But another model that I looked at were Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, and how they have retained this really beautifully strong friendship despite their having been divorced, despite their children, you know, they're now grown, and yet they still have this very cohesive, strong, what appears to be a beautiful family dynamic that is a new blended modern family. And that's really what my ex and I have been spending our time working on over the course of this summer. It's been to focus on and continue focusing on how to become this new modern family, so that my daughter's view of the world is one that is not permanently damaged by how her father and I behave towards each other, and how we behave as a family with her, and how we behave as a family when we're apart. So I really wanted to break down some of the more common co-parenting challenges that you could be facing in the co-parenting era of your single era, and to explore some solutions, because anyone who knows me will know that I am about solutions finding. I'm all about let's fix the problem. So the first co-parenting challenge that I think so many of us can relate to are those tense moments that you can have, particularly when you've recently separated and it feels so raw and you're just emotionally exposed to everything that's going on. So those moments of pickups and drop-offs and handovers of your child or children can feel really tense. It can be incredibly difficult when you and your ex aren't able to get past that tension, and you can't interact without exchanging comments or passive-aggressive jibes, or worse, even breaking into fighting. I know that for sure is what my ex and I were doing in the early days of our separation. And the challenge of that can really make the co-parenting journey much more complicated. It is complicated as is, but it's also essential to find ways to navigate that situation that can prioritize the well-being of your child or children, but can also acknowledge the fact that in that moment you are hurting and healing. And one approach that is understood to work well, it certainly worked well for my ex and I, is where you establish some kind of clear boundary around how those interactions work. So, for example, rather than having the drop-offs and the pickups at your home that might still feel emotionally volatile, particularly if that was your shared family home, finding somewhere else that's neutral. That could be a third party. It could be a friend, a family member, somewhere where you kind of do that handover where there's an impartial, or as impartial as possible, person sort of there. Or it could be a more public space. My ex and I, we used our health club. We would do pickups, drop-offs, handovers. We would do it all in and around our health club. It felt like we had actually moved there for some time. But that can really help. And it certainly did for me, that sort of post-plot twist period where I just felt so exposed and vulnerable and raw, that being in and around my home just did not work. And so that can really, if you can find that sort of third space where you can do that whilst you're figuring out how to manage your emotions and how to be with each other and around one another, it can really help get that dynamic onto a much better footing when hopefully you're able to not act out on your emotions so much because you're in a neutral space. I also think it's really valuable to remind yourself in those moments where you're finding the period and the time and the experience challenging, that you are not alone in facing that challenge. There's so many co-parents who have found ways to improve these interactions over time, and Google is your friend. I Google and find blogs and chats and, go on the mums chats and what have you to try and find out ways that are working for other people and to try and integrate that over time. Another really big challenge, and it's one that I and my ex really did struggle with at the beginning especially, and it's managing the anger that you have about the situation, and then working on building a healthy relationship. And that, for me, and if you're anything like me, where you maybe didn't have healthy examples growing up of how to manage anger in the family home and how to manage anger in relationships, then you may not have the tools at your disposal to understand how to navigate anger and the emotions that come with it in a way that isn't volatile. And that's something that you have to put the time into learning. It's something that I have to actively work on, because all of my programmed examples are of unhealthy anger and how that can be displayed when emotions are raw or triggered. And it's very human. It's very, very human to feel anger. It's a natural part of our makeup, and it's not uncommon to become emotionally entangled with your co-parent, especially when I know this can apply to those who haven't been in a relationship for a long time, but if you have been in a long-term relationship, part of that anger at the demise of that relationship can really linger. And the emotional attachment that you have with your ex can also hinder the progress that you're able to make in creating a new life post-separation or post-divorce. And that is really the challenge, because the lines of what your relationship was to what it now is can feel like they're blurred. And you're in this for a period of time, could be a long period of time, but it can feel like you're in this kind of limbo between where your relationship was and what it now is and what it's going to become. Holding on to resentment, however, or yearning for your old life, that's definitely a pitfall that I fell into on very many occasions. Being angry about missed opportunities or disappointed or hurt about missed opportunities, again, so many occasions I have fallen into the black hole, the abyss of it wasn't supposed to be this way, this is not how it's supposed to be, almost refusing to kind of just get to grips with the fact that this is what's happening. It can emotionally tie you to your ex, and it can also halt the healing process. And a successful co-parenting relationship, it ultimately involves breaking the emotional bond to the extent that it doesn't become toxic. It's breaking it and reforming it, because again, ideally, and this is what I'm really striving to have, is a friendship that continues and that remains irrespective of everything that's happened and the toxicity that comes with the hurt and the pain and the disappointment and the anguish. It's working with that to allow you to concentrate on being present in your current interactions as co-parents and hopefully friends, but no longer a couple. Another co-parenting issue that is again fairly common is the criticism trap that you can fall into, where you're critiquing each other's parenting styles, because you go from being this sort of nucleus family where you're, in one home, and you're suddenly parenting in different homes. And so very many of us have very different styles of behaving and operating and living, and our values can be very different. And that can really be accentuated when you're operating from different households. So things like discipline and bedtime routines or household rules, all of those can vary. And I do feel very lucky with this. I feel extremely lucky that my ex and I are largely on the same page when it comes to parenting styles. I recognise, of course, that is not the case for everyone. And the solution really for you as a separated or divorced parent and co-parent is to find some common ground when it comes to your parenting strategies, and to find some alignment that can make it easier for both of you, but also provide some stability for your child or your children, because it's really vital that they have that continuity between homes, and removing, where possible, as much ambiguity and confusion about what's right, what's acceptable behaviour from one parent to the other really makes their life a hell of a lot easier as well. Crucially, what I've found is that the consistency builds trust between you as co-parents, and also that if you're upholding your side of the agreement of what it is that you've agreed and they are doing vice versa, that you tend to fall more into some sort of cohesive alignment with the way in which you're co-parenting. If, however, you haven't found a plan yet, and you haven't identified that, it can be challenging to create one, but it's one that's really worthy of the time to invest in creating that plan, because there's not a golden rule. There's no right way of doing the co-parenting thing. We're all kind of navigating it to the best of our capability, but there's a wealth of information out there. And yes, there's not a golden rule, but you are looking to ideally not fall into a place where you're providing sort of like dictating as to how the other parent should parent, because ultimately, yes, you want to have an agreement on how you're going to parent your children, but you are still both individuals and adults, so you're going to be potentially doing things differently. And it's really, I think, getting to a point of allowance and acceptance with that so that you can handle that as it unfolds. You also, it's really key, and again, probably because of my own sort of lived experience in my childhood where I was always involved in my parents' arguments, you don't want your kids to, ideally you don't want your kids to see you arguing and fighting, and you certainly don't want to involve them in it, and you certainly don't want to get them to pick sides. That happened to me all the time as a kid, and it was awful. To this day, I believe that the relationship I have with my parents is probably inherited by that experience somewhat. And I refuse to have that for my daughter with my ex or myself. That's not what we're going for. Critically, I guess, regardless of the feelings that you have towards your ex, though, respecting their right to parent is really vital to the success of co-parenting. And if you can align those parenting styles and also respect each other and respect each other's parenting choices, that's what's going to help you to reach that sort of the nirvana of the co-parenting journey. It's worthwhile reminding yourself, and I do this all the time with everything that's ever happening, this is really about creating a stable and nurture environment for my daughter. Everything else, I have to just kind of suck it up and handle. So the last challenge that I wanted to cover is one that I'm really, oh my gosh, I'm so struggling with it. And I don't think we're talking enough about this in the culture. And that's where if you have a home or a dynamic or a relationship where you're both hands-on parents and you have a parent, you have a partner that helps around the home to the same extent, chips in with the chores, does a lot of the housework, shares all of that element, and is also really hands-on with the parenting, that it can be really, really tough going to then just be in this sort of single parent environment. And that is what I have got to say. In my relationship, my former relationship, my ex and I, right from the outset, we split everything. I grew up in a home where my mother she worked, and she worked in the home, and she would cook the food, and she would go out and work all day, and she would come back and be expected to do everything else. And my father did not contribute to the home or the household chores. I was heavily involved in performing household chores as a daughter, but for my brother, that was not the case. And it was, deeply, deeply wrong. And it was something that I knew that as I grew up, I was not prepared to accept that with any relationship I had. And that was absolutely the case. And it has been the case throughout the entirety of the relationship that I had with my ex. We would share the way in which things worked. I would even go so far as to say he did more around the house than I would do on very many occasions, because I don't like doing housework because of the fact that I had to do so much housework as a teenager, and I would be very brutally punished if I didn't get the housework correct. And B, because I was the main earner, so I would very often be working longer hours, or I'd be working away. And so that split in that dynamic in our household was as such that he would very often do more of the chores if I would be sort of working long hours, etc. And it continued on when we became parents as well. There were things that were definitely not my strength. Ironing is not my strong suit. It was something that he was good at and he didn't mind doing. He would just crack on a DVD box set and just get on with the ironing. So our household was always very evenly split. The challenge really is then when you become a single parent household and you're a single person, and you're not just a single person as an adult. I think that the whole separation thing is obviously going to be so much easier if you're separating as adults without children. because then a great many things that are needed to be done in my home wouldn't need to be done in my home. And the same would be for anybody, that if you separate as a single person, it's far easier than if you separate with children. And that really is one of the big challenges. Learning to parent alone while living in separate households can be really tough. It can be tough emotionally, it can be challenging on both parents and adults and as children, because you suddenly find yourself navigating parenthood on your own. And your partner, your husband, whoever it is that has moved out of your home, or if you've moved out of the home, you're now spending the majority or half of your time parenting and adulting without the support of the partnership that you once had. And that transition can be really overwhelming. When my ex and I first separated, I would have to really focus on being so organized the night before doing the school run, because typically school runs in the morning my ex would do every day. And so I would have to really focus on how to be organized so that I could fit my work in and get my daughter ready for school and get out of the house on time and remember all the things that he would typically participate in doing, because I was so used to having somebody participating in that. It was very, very, very tag team in terms of one picking up the whatever it was that needed to be done, and then the other person doing the next bit, and the other and suddenly all of that's falling to me. And it blew my mind for a good couple of months for me to get into a routine of doing that. And you might find yourself in the same place. Like, if you're used to sharing the housework, if you're used to sharing the laundry, if you're used to doing the school runs and drop-offs, and suddenly all of that comes to you, like, if you're in an economic situation where you can outsource that, fantastic, amazing. If you're not, and you don't have this metaphorical sort of like village that supports you, which I don't, I feel that you have to figure out a lot of tools and strategies, and you have to play around with what works so you can maintain and manage the things that need to be done in your home. And for me, it is like mapping out the week, meal planning. Sunday's my prep day. There's days that I will do ironing. There's days that it's just sort of juggling all the pieces around. And that will happen until I can hire help again. But the other crucial thing with all of this is actually dealing with your emotions while adjusting to solo parenting. It's super normal to feel a range of emotions. And I will, kind of ping from sadness to anger to loneliness to just feeling really lost. If you've been in a relationship for a long time, or even not a long time, even if it's just a few years, like you become used to what you become used to, and adjusting to that can be really tough going. And that's, I think, honouring that and accepting that and just leaning into that but not wallowing in it is absolutely necessary as well. And what I will say with that is to remember that self-care, like actually taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, mentally, like making time for you to spend time with friends, to do the things that you enjoy, like carving that time out for yourself is absolutely vital, because you really can't pour from an empty cup. And as somebody that typically works to the point of burnout, I know that I am not effective when I'm not taking the time out to do the things that help me to feel good. In the end of all of this, learning to parent after separation while living in separate households, it is a significant change and it is a challenge, but it is one that does improve over time. So I'm now several months into this journey, and I can honestly say that with each passing month, it does become a little bit easier, and I just become a little bit more used to it. And my daughter's really kind of thriving with the dynamic, and we still as a family spend a lot of time as a family in a very new dynamic, of course, but we're still a family, and we are really keen to impress that on our daughter, that we live in separate homes but we're still a family. And if that can work for you to have that same sentiment, then I really advocate on behalf of that. Communication, consistency, emotional support, self-care, these are all of the things that it's so vital within this single era to really to really hold on to. And to know that it is going to be okay. Even when it's really tough, if it's at the start, if you're listening to this and you're at the start of that separation journey, it's tough, but it will get easier. It will. And with each passing day, you'll become more aware of what's working. And there'll be some days that will be really hard and you will lose your shit. Happens to me often, but that's okay. With each passing day, it will get easier. And so on that note, I'm off to go continue my co-parenting for the rest of the day. More handovers, more juggles, more managing my household on my own and all of that good stuff. But I'd love to thank you all for listening and for tuning in. And if any of what I've shared today on the journey of co-parenting has resonated, if you relate, then contact information is in the show notes and some other resources as well to how to co-parent and how to get through some of the joyous challenges that can be this journey. But on that note, thank you so much for listening to the Single Era Diaries. I'll be back again next week. The Single Era Diaries is produced and distributed by Nascent Media and executive produced by me, Jade Graham. Podcasts grow by being liked and shared, so if you enjoyed today's show, then please be sure to like and share with a friend who you think will enjoy the show too. Subscribe, and if you have a moment to rate and review wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, that would be super appreciated too. Thank you for listening, and peace out.